I've known this gentleman for many, many years. He came into Waltham and he created a new slogan for the city of Waltham. Those of you that know anything about Waltham, we always used to be the watch city. We haven't made watches in 100 years, you know. Who wears a watch today when you got your time on your phone? But Eddie Markey came in a number of years ago and said, you know what? You're actually the city to watch. And people's eyes lit up, and they loved it. He has that presence. He has that demeanor about him that we all want to see in our elected officials. He's been in Congress for 35 years. He's been working on telecom issues every one of those years. He's the Dean of the New England and Massachusetts Congressional Delegation. He's a champion of government transparency and cable access issues. He's our friend in Massachusetts. He's a friend of PEG Access nationwide. I'm happy to say he's also a friend of mine. This is Congressman Ed Markey.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. In so many ways, the local cable system really represents the modern form of the town meeting that was invented here in Massachusetts, that was at the heart of the American Revolution, which still in many ways is the way in which we govern ourselves here in Massachusetts, because it goes right to the heart of local participatory government and citizen input, so that we can ensure that every citizen has a way, a voice to express their views in the way in which our government operates, and for a local individual community to express their own individual personality, their own way of dealing with the totality of their community. And so, 35 years ago, when I was elected to Congress, I asked to be put on the telecommunications subcommittee, and I am now the longest serving member in the history of the United States Congress on the telecommunications subcommittee. And long ago, back in the very early 70s, here in Malden, when Warner Cable came and wired this city, one of the very first things that they did was to install a public access channel. And when I ran for state representative here in Malden in 1972, I was trailed on a daily basis by a reporter from the Malden Access Channel that was on this street and just down another about 4 buildings. And that was something which, to me, made it a lot different than anything that I had expected, because now you had a local community access channel, not channel 4, 5, 7, which at that point were the only ones that existed. Now 25 and 38 and 56 and all of the other ways in which you can get out information, but not information that deals specifically with the city of Malden. That's the heart of what this whole cable access movement was supposed to be all about. And over the years, as different laws were put on the books, I fought to ensure that the public, the educational, and the governmental channel was there. It was there not just for Malden, my hometown, but for every community in Massachusetts and across the United States of America, because that was the promise of cable TV. The promise of cable TV was that it would make it possible for every individual community to localize the coverage of what was going on, so that you would not be dependent upon the city of Boston's TV stations to ensure that every individual citizen in every community had access to the information which related to their own community, because that really was the beauty of the cable revolution. Back in 1977, one of the very first and most important cable decisions that we had to make on the committee was to ensure that a cable company, and at that point, Malden was in the first 5% of all communities in the country to have cable. But the telephone companies were fighting it. They were making it more difficult than it should have been for the cable companies to come to communities. They were saying that a cable company could not use a telephone pole in order to bring a wire down a street. They said that the cable companies had to build their own pole. And you can only imagine how long that would have taken, since it took about 100 years for the phone system to get built out. Well, there were some of us that believed that the only way in which we were going to actually enjoy the pluperfect form of what the cable revolution could bring is if we mandated that the telephone company let the cable company use the telephone pole, so that the cable wire could be strung down the streets of Massachusetts and our country in a telescope time frame, so that they would be the beneficiaries. And that began to really speed up that revolution. Then in 1984, in the Cable Act, we ensured that there would be access for local public educational governmental channels, so that there would be real protection, and so on as each year went by, so that now anyone who is really under the age of 30 has no memory or knowledge of a world before 100 channels coming into their home. It just doesn't seem like there could have been such a time. And it's all because of a plan which we put together in order to ensure that the full benefits of what the cable revolution could bring was made available to everyone. And for me, back in 1972, before there was a Showtime, before there was an ESPN, before there was an MTV, the one thing that I knew existed when a cable revolution came to your home was the local cable access channel. That was there, covering me, running for state representative against the incumbent in the primary. And I had no chance of winning, said every single expert here in Malden. But you know, we already had cable. People were watching cable. I had a way of being interviewed and being seen. And so when I won that primary against the incumbent that everyone said was impossible to beat, it wasn't lost on me that the local cable access channel had provided a way in which I was able to have my voice heard. As a counter movement now begins to kind of restrict the local access channels, we're down in Washington partnering with all of you, mounting a counterinsurgency, introducing legislation that will be the Community Access Preservation Act to ensure that there is real protection that is given to the permanent preservation and perpetuation of the local community access channels. And so what we do in the legislation that we have to move in order to ensure that we do not see a fallback from what we've come to enjoy and to recognize as local public access is, one, there should be no unnecessary limits on the use of PEG funds. You know, this is just something that we cannot allow to happen, and our legislation will amend the Cable Act to ensure that PEG fees can be used for any purpose, not just for facilities, not just for equipment, but for operating expenses as well. Otherwise, you know, it's highly unlikely that we will see, you know, the existence of local cable access as we have known it. Next, we have to protect against the discriminatory treatment of PEG channels. Our legislation will reaffirm that operators must deliver PEG channels to subscribers without additional charges. And by way of channels whose quality and accessibility and functionality and placement is equivalent to the local commercial television channels, so that the public knows where that channel is, and they know, if you're here in Malden, Channel 16, you know where you can go to watch the Malden City Council in its deliberations on how the city of Malden is governed. You can also get on to Channel 3 as well, if you want sometimes. And then the preservation of the PEG support and localism. We need immediate action to preserve PEG, to permit Congress to review the impact of these changes on local programming. The FCC in our legislation is directed to investigate and to report to Congress on the impact of state video servicing franchising laws since 2005 on PEG, and that is to ensure that PEG is preserved and that each cable operator must provide the channels and critical facilities it had been providing historically. Operators must make ongoing PEG support payments equal to the greater of the cash payment required under state law or the value of the PEG support it historically provided. As we know, there's a trend in many states across the country not to have individual community by community stations, but to have one statewide system, and that is now happening in many states across the country. So we just have to be on guard against that, and the legislation helps to ensure that that is the case. And then there's a definition of a cable system, so that we ensure that it is a technologically neutral law, so that any provider using wired facilities in any rights of way, down any city or town entity across our country are treated similarly and are subject to similar PEG requirements, so that there is not discriminatory practices that are engaged in, or that a regulatory black hole opens up that doesn't even wind up providing for PEG services in a community. So we are committed, Representative Baldwin from Wisconsin and I and other members, in advancing this legislation very aggressively. And we do so knowing that it is the people who sit here who are in many ways now the voice of the community, the people who use the technologies to access to any citizen so that their voices can be heard. And that's really the genius of this revolution that I had the honor of being a part of back in the 1970s, and have tried my best to extend to every community, so that every citizen here in Malden feels as though it's their channel. Every person in Medford feels as though it's their channel. Every person in Everett, you name it, not just those communities, but every state, every community in Massachusetts and across our country. So I thank you for everything that you do on a daily basis. And I'm going to be your partner in this fight. I'm going to be with you every single step of the way to make sure, you know, this democratizing force that you add is something that you just have to work. And, you know, you can't beg for freedom. You have to take it. Okay? That's what we're going to have to do here. We just have to fight to make sure that there's a freedom, you know, for the local voices to be heard, for everyone that is here to be able to fight. And this is one thing I think that all of us should agree upon, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or a Tea Party, right? That you should have the right to have your voice heard. and that this local, ability to provide all this individual programming be put in place. So I am your ally. I am with you. I thank you for inviting me, and let's go on and win this battle this year. Thank you all so, so much.
Okay, I have a presentation to make to Congressman Markey. Ed would like to present you with this plaque, and the plaque reads, Massachusetts MassAccess 2011 Legislator of the Year, presented to Edward J. Markey, Representative, U.S. Congress, 7th District of Massachusetts, for your tireless efforts in preserving the mission of PEG Community Television in Massachusetts and across the country. We are grateful for your continued support, the MassAccess Board of Directors and membership.
Because participatory democracy is only possible if the local citizens' voices can be heard. And in addition, there's a Greek word called agape, and agape means giving people an ability to respond to human suffering, so that they can see what the problems are, they can see what a community has, and that's what a local PEG channel with its best use makes possible. It makes it possible for local citizens to engage in agape, to respond to the human suffering, to respond to the local concerns, to stand up and to participate in the needs of their community, and to make it visible to everyone. And that's what I thank all of you for doing, because all across the country on a daily basis, that's what the local public and educational and governmental channels make possible. So thank you all so, so much.